Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
How can you make the most of your MBA experience? Well, after reflecting on their own MBA experiences and those of hundreds of successful graduates, two former Deloitte consultants, Adam Putterman and Bob Manfreda, wrote MBA Coffee Chats, thoughtful advice on how to get the most out of your MBA. Adam Putterman graduated from Northwestern's dual degree program, their dual MBA and design innovation degree, and Bob Manfreda graduated from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Well, once I saw this book up on the Amazon store, I knew I had to buy it. Bought it, read it, tried to get one or both of the authors on the show. We were lucky to get Adam on the show. And I think you'll really enjoy this conversation because why not get a sneak preview to when you've gotten admitted to your dream schools and you're trying to figure out how to make the most of your MBA experience, right? Because here at Touch MBA, we're all about helping you make the best MBA investment, and this is a huge part of that equation. Even though their book is targeted at MBA admits, I believe that you, MBA applicants, can use a lot of the same techniques to set up your own coffee chats with hopefully many students or recent alumni at your target schools. It's because in the end, as they say in their book, the greatest tool you have to get information you previously didn't know is through these MBA coffee chats. So I want to make sure that you guys have the tools to do this. I also want to thank this episode's sponsor, Queen's University's Smith Full-Time MBA. The path to your next big career move goes through Canada. The 12-month full-time MBA program at Queen's University's Smith School of Business features a proven team-based experiential curriculum built around the exact set of skills that top employers seek. The results speak for themselves. 98% of the class of 2021 accepted an offer for their dream role within 3 months of graduation. Listeners, that's you, of the Touch MBA podcast can receive a complimentary virtual consultation by visiting yoursmithmba.com/touchmba. That's yoursmithmba.com/touchmba. So yes, thank you very much to Queen's University in Canada for supporting our mission to democratize the best information and resources to you MBA applicants so you can make the best investment. Also, if you need free school selection help, we offer that at touchmba.com. Now, you'll have to fill out a really onerous form. It is long, it is a bit of a bear, but the reason why we ask for so much information is so we can give you, the best guidance that we can. Which schools might fit you best, where you are competitive at, and how you can materially improve your MBA application and profile. So you can find all that at touchmba.com. And now let's get to my conversation with Adam Putterman. So my next guest is co-founder of Ours, a relationship wellness company, and a 2019 graduate of Northwestern's dual MBA and Master's in Science in Design Innovation degree. And in 2021, along with an old colleague, Bob Manfreda, he co-authored MBA Coffee Chats, thoughtful advice on how to get the most out of your MBA, which we'll be discussing today. Adam Putterman, thank you so much for your time and welcome to the Touch MBA podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me and thanks for reaching out. I'm excited to chat. Nailed the intro. It's a mouthful, so I appreciate it. But yeah, I'm excited to talk.
So first, maybe we could get into a little bit of background. I'm wondering how you and Bob met and how and why this book came about.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Bob and I actually started our first job out of undergrad together. We were in the same analyst class at Deloitte in their strategy consulting division. And we just happened to be in the same class, same office, and hit it off and became really close friends. And while I was at Kellogg, he was at Stanford. And one of the things we kind of did for those 2 years was just recurring check-ins on how the experience was going, what our goals were, and whether we were kind of accomplishing them or whether they were even the right goals, things like that. And then after school, we knew we each kind of went our separate ways work-wise, but we stayed in touch and wanted to kind of work on something together. And the thing we ended up working on was this book, which really came out of personal need. And the personal need, at least, was we had each spent so much time and effort getting into school. And then after we got in, it was just this total, almost like void of support or information, right? It's like you get into school and it's like, good luck. When in reality, that's kind of right when it's starting. So we wrote the book kind of almost as a book to ourselves a few years earlier, if that makes sense.
Oh, I love that. And I actually was really curious about, why you guys had these recurring check-ins. I found that actually to be a really interesting part of the book, right? And the impetus for the book. And like, what inspired you guys to do that, to have these quarterly or yearly check-ins?
Yeah, it's maybe in some ways less interesting than you'd expect, in that we were just very close friends and would call each other randomly. I don't want to pretend like these were necessarily more structured than they were, but what was structured was, or not what was structured, what was a little more intentional was some of the writing we did throughout. So we caught up a lot just because we were friends from a check-in perspective. But what we did kind of a step further was share long-form thoughts on what we were thinking, where we were trying to go, and what we were experiencing. And that was incredibly helpful and more just came as a natural outlet of what we were doing than anything intentional. It was a little more organic.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, because as an entrepreneur myself, I find that to be like one of the most helpful things I've done, right? Is to find other business owners and kind of be more vulnerable and kind of share, what's going on each quarter or each year, and realizing, you're not alone maybe in facing some of these issues that you're facing, and also learning from other people's experience. So I just love that practice, and that's cool that just happened organically. But yeah, let's talk about, I'd like to talk about 3 parts of the book. And the first is the MBA Coffee Chat itself. Right. So you guys have this great quote basically saying, I'm paraphrasing, that, the MBA Coffee Chats are actually the best way to kind of fight misinformation, that you might find on MBA websites, maybe even ours, or like Poets and Quants or other admissions consulting blogs, or, school websites, which are obviously very biased and kind of showing only the best and brightest parts of the experience. And so I want to talk about, I want to get your thoughts on, first, how to find people to chat with, and then what to ask and how to ask it. Because I think this could be just as useful for applicants as recent admits, even though I know that's your target audience for your book, right? So maybe let's start with your suggestions or ideas on, finding people that you could really get some really good information from, and where it's not like super uncomfortable to ask them.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the best way to think about this is almost in terms of tiers, or like a multi-circle or section Venn diagram, right? In that you almost can't talk to too many people, particularly during the application process and the selection process, because what you're looking to reveal is sort of the unknown unknowns and the big things that are going to shape your experience that you have no way of finding an objective answer to on the internet, right? Or in a pamphlet or whatever it may be. And so that's kind of the first, maybe high level principle. The second high level principle, before getting into some specifics, is that people really enjoy and are primed to help you at this time in your life and in this scenario. There's a very strong pay it forward culture. Almost everyone does dozens of these coffee chats, and then they get to school, and it's fun and enjoyable to pay it forward and do it again for new applicants and new prospective students. So I think the second thing there is really just not to overthink it. Or I know for some people, including me, it felt like I was almost being a burden to people by asking them to speak, which can be true, and we can get into that. But overall, it's always better to reach out, particularly in this situation. In terms of finding people, going back to that idea of tiers or sections, a lot of it depends on you, at first, what your personal network is. So I was lucky enough to have a job in consulting, which has a really, really high percentage of past and present MBAs. So I was surrounded by people that were either applying, were in school, or had recently left school, or on and on. So if that's the case and you have a very strong MBA specific network like that, I don't think there's anything I really need to tell you, right? It's like send emails to the people you know, and it's not that difficult. It's more just you have to do it and make sure you're doing it in as broad of a way as possible, right? Like if all of your colleagues went to one school, then don't ask them about other schools. Reach out to other people. And then the second way is just looking for almost beachheads of commonality. So let's say you don't know anyone at Yale, but you're very interested in it and want to talk to someone there. What you might do is use LinkedIn or your network or something else similar to find someone who's a current student or a recent graduate who went to your high school, or who played the same sport as you growing up, or who somehow has a personal website and they mention the same hobby as you have. They like reading science fiction or something. And that's often an easy way to reach out to people and get them on the phone and start talking about their experience. It's also an easy way to say, like, okay, if we share this similar set of career background or personal background, maybe their experience at the school will be more or less representative of your experience. And so that's, I guess, like the first step, which is how to find people, with the encouragement being you should be able to find a lot of people, and you can almost just spray and pray with emails, and that people want to be very helpful. Maybe the second, well, I'll pause there because I feel like I'm losing the thread here. That was the first question, right?
Yeah. No, please.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Well, yeah, maybe. So just a few notes there. I remember when, many of my friends were going through the MBA, and I remember one friend in particular who's been on the podcast. Her name is Pin, and she told me it's like you never have a better chance to ask people for help as when you're an MBA student. So
yeah.
Not just students, right? But people, CEOs or, senior people in companies, leaders of state, et cetera, because you're a student again. And so it kind of gives you this halo where, you can ask people for stuff, which maybe, in a professional setting would be tougher.
I agree more. It's a superpower, legitimately.
Superpower, right? And then I liked your idea of the beachheads of commonality, because one quote that particularly struck me from your book was, just try to find 2 degrees of overlap with the people you're reaching out to. And I think that's like a good heuristic. But yeah, let's continue on with what to ask and how to ask it. If you have any tips there.
Yeah, I think that's almost where we had the strongest opinion. So I'll skip the part which is like how you craft that email potentially, because I think there's actually a lot of good writing about that.
Well, no, I mean, I think you piqued our interest. How should we do that?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of different opinions on there, and I'm not sure I have like the strongest opinion on this, because different things resonate with different people, and there's a lot of good writing out there. My general recommendation with how to craft the email is always to have a very short and clear summary and hook at the top, starting the email not with "Hi Adam, hope all is well, blah blah blah," but just saying, "Hey, we went to the same high school and I'd love to chat with you about your MBA." Enter, here's some context on me and why and what I'd like to, etc. But summarizing the entire email in the first sentence and then putting context below it, I think is a nice little hack that helps, particularly when people are busy. And then I think the final thing is in the email, at least hinting and providing a few samples of very specific, non-Googleable questions that are relevant to them and them alone. a lot of people send an email that's the equivalent of that says something to the effect of, "Hey, I'd love to get on the phone and pick your brain." And that's fine if you're close with someone and you're a friend. But if it's a stranger, I think it drastically increases the likelihood that they're not going to respond to your email because they don't know what type of call it's going to be. And if you've done your homework, or if they're just going to be saying things to you that you could have Googled. Outside of that, a lot of people have different preferences email wise. I tend to prefer a more casual email. I have friends who want the exact opposite, and that's just preference. When it comes to what you actually ask, I have, and Bob and I both have much stronger opinions on that, because we think this is really, the crux of probably the back third of the book, and where we think that we, in some ways at first went wrong, but eventually went a little different in a way that paid off in a big way. And I think the ultimate goal of all your questions is not to network or get support or buy-in or anything like that, right? It's to reveal information that you didn't previously have that might affect your decision. And that's a little bit different for us because we're focusing on on you've already gotten into the school, or you're talking with someone that has no sway on you getting into the school, which is 99% of the people, right? I think there's this false impression that you can talk to a student and they have the ability to either prevent you from getting in or get you into the school. Maybe if you have a terrible call, they can drop a note that's like, "I thought this person was a bad fit." I've never heard of that happening though. And on the flip side, if you have an amazing call, maybe they can drop a note saying, "I think this person is a good fit." I've never seen that weighted too heavily, but an admissions director would know better than I would. So the first step being, the goal of this call is not to get into the school, right? It's to get information or build a relationship, obviously. But you're trying to get some information that you wouldn't otherwise have. But there's something very sneaky there, which is if someone is at that school, they're unbelievably biased.
Yes.
So most of them are going to be biased for the school. Some of them are going to be hating their experience and thus biased against the school. But it doesn't matter. And all it means is that the information you're likely to get, if not asked in a specific way, is worse than useless because it's given with authority and credibility. So it's even worse because you don't know that you should discount it. So you have to craft your questions in a way that get beyond this bias. So for instance, like one of our favorite questions that we recommend that I think does a really good job at revealing some very important information for applicants is something to the effect of, who amongst your friends at this school are not having a good experience and why, and who are they? And what that does is it pulls them out of their zone of opinion, like personal opinion, and starts to reveal some important things. And then very plainly, what it also does is, like I mentioned before, most current students are rationalizing why they love the experience. And so they're not going to give you super valuable, positive information. So you just end up hearing a lot of positive stuff. Yeah, what that question does such a good job of is it draws out valuable information about why you might not be a good fit. And I kind of buried the lead here, but that's the most valuable information because you're about to spend a ton of time at this school. And the reasons why you might love it are almost less important than the reasons why you might hate it. So I recommend that at least half your questions, if not more, are oriented around finding reasons why you are not going to like the experience rather than reasons that you will like the experience, because the former is far more differentiated and specific or idiosyncratic than the latter. Every school has great culture and every school has great professors and all that stuff. So all that matters is how it fits you in particular.
I love that advice. Would you recommend any other ways to kind of put the person you're interviewing at ease? I would imagine they would have, their true honest opinions about ways the school could be improved or the types of students that, aren't having the best experience, but they might be hesitant to share that with a stranger or someone they don't know as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't had that experience, I guess.
Okay. That's great. Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think people are willing to talk about the negatives because they know what you're going through. So I think you can be very direct. Like another question we used to ask all the time is just like, what's your least favorite part of the school? Or who would not be a good fit here is a great one. So for instance, whenever anyone asks me that about Kellogg, my answer is always people that don't thrive and have no interest in thriving working in team environments, because the entire curriculum and every class and every little thing is structured around group and teamwork. And so if that's not of interest to you, and it's something that you don't enjoy, then you should not go to that school because you'll be miserable. So I think it's more just about being willing to ask the question than it is warming them up to be able to answer it.
That's great. And what about, like, you also had some very two specific questions that you should always end coffee chats with. And would you mind sharing those with us?
Oh, yeah. The first one is always, who else should I talk to? I think, I actually don't remember exactly how we worded these. Do you mind reminding me? What exactly?
Not at all. So the reason I bring this up is because, again, like you said, I felt like a real force of opinion here from you and Bob, like in these chapters, right? So you're like, you should always end coffee chats with two specific questions. First is, what didn't I ask that I should have? And the second one is there anyone else you'd be willing to introduce me to talk about XYZ?
Yeah.
Or do you know anyone else we could talk to about XYZ, right?
It's funny because what makes us feel so strongly about those questions is that they're compounding questions and that they build exponentially, right? In a way. So starting with the second one, if you reach out to one person and only one person, like let's say you're only able to get one person to reply to your email, as long as you answer that or ask that last question, you're going to be able to keep getting calls and keep getting information. And so like you have to do it. And it's also a good introduction into what is like a very stereotypical MBA culture type trait, which is everyone is constantly to a certain degree networking and connecting people. And it's just a part of the world or a part of that world. So I think that's the obvious one, right? Because it connects you. And then the kind of subtle tweak to that is that you're willing to connect me right. And that is like me, or that would be valuable for me to talk to. Because a lot of times people are like, hey, is there anyone else you can introduce me to? I'm like, well, what are you looking for? Especially if you're in school, hundreds of people that would be more than happy to talk to them. So the more you can narrow that question, the better, which I think we advise a little bit in there. Like the best thing you can say is something to the effect of, hey, do you know anyone else that's also looking to create a healthcare startup while they're in school when they're coming from a finance background? Because there's a good chance they know that person, and that person has done exactly what you're looking to do. And why wouldn't you ask? It's like a lottery ticket that will probably hit. So that's the first one. And then the second one is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have? And I think part of this goes back to your point actually around warming up the conversation a little bit. You're talking to someone, there's asymmetric information on the call, and people are busy and they don't have a lot of time, and they're going to prioritize answering your questions, but maybe you're not asking the right questions. And this is just kind of like a safety release, pulling the safety release type question, where maybe you said something that triggered an idea or a concern, and you're allowing it to come out by asking that question.
Exactly. And what time would you recommend, when people approach you, right? Like, what's a reasonable amount of time for these coffee chats?
I think assuming it's a stranger and not a friend, right? Because it increases. Like I would say, if it's a complete stranger that you've never met before, you generally want to say something in the email of like 15 to 30 minutes. That gives them an out if if they're super busy, or frankly, they just don't like you, or vice versa. Gives them an easy out at 15 minutes. And it's hard to say no to a 15-minute call a lot of the time. And 30 is plenty to get in whatever you need for core information. If you're closer with someone and you're lucky enough to have people in your network that have gone through this already, then you do want to have a few of these calls that are more like 45 to 60 minutes where you're really digging in. But those are more akin to a mentorship type call. So I would say in general, these calls should be 15 to 30 minutes.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, let me kind of flip the script on you and ask for this specific subject. Is there anything else that I should have asked?
I don't think so. These are great questions, but I feel like I have to come up with something just to prove the value of the question. But no, I won't force it.
I'd like to talk about prioritizing time, which was one of your chapters as well. You know, I hear this a lot from both friends that have gone through the experience to, you know, people that have come through Touch MBA, that there's just such a fire hose of things to drink out of and to do during your MBA experience. And so I just want to get your thoughts there. Maybe I'll read one quote to kind of jog your memory a bit about what you wrote. So this is quoting, you guys. It's also worth noting that one of the most important things you'll build during this time in your life is a healthy network of smart, ambitious friends that like and trust you. The most common way people burn that trust is by signing up for too much and then dropping an activity last minute or delivering poor work. You don't want to be that person. So consistently saying no can feel a little weird at first. One tactic is to start by making a list of the activities, industries, and jobs you definitely don't care about. That sounds like very right, but very hard to do to me. Maybe it's not. Maybe it
particularly sounds hard. Yeah, no, I think it is very hard. It's interesting because this was, I think, like probably the first thing we ever wrote for the book, if I'm remembering correctly. I might be wrong. Yeah, it was definitely one of the first things. And at the time, we always talked about it as a to-don't list. And this kind of predates the book all the way back to, as most of these things, when we were just talking. But this was one of the things that the two of us kind of discovered or created for ourselves during our time at school that just paid paid off so well. I think this was actually Bob's idea that I adopted really quickly after seeing how well it was working for him. And the idea is that given the nature of school and like you just read, the endless and infinite amount of opportunity you have, there's way more power in deciding what you will not do than what you will do, particularly because you're going there to a certain degree for experimentation. And shallow experimentation isn't as or can be very invaluable or not valuable. I'm pretty sure invaluable would mean it's very valuable, whichever made sense to me. But practically, I think the two places we talk about this the most or think about this the most are in terms of your activities and your career search. And the career search side is a little bit more specific because not everyone is experimenting or pivoting or not sure what they're looking for. Whereas on the activity side, everyone to a certain degree is experimenting. But I think the main thing we're trying to combat here is like the strong feeling of shiny object syndrome and peer pressure. And the shiny object syndrome is that when you get to school, there's just so many cool random things you've never heard of, and it's hard to not do them. And then the peer pressure side is if everyone you know that you're friends with or that you respect or that you're in class with is applying for the product manager job, it becomes increasingly hard to justify you not also applying, right? Because all you're hearing all day is how amazing this job is or something like that. So practically, I think this is one of those things that is best done very simply. And at least what I used to do is at the beginning of every quarter, in particular, I would write a list of the things that I did not want to do. And on the flip side, I would write a shorter list of the things that that were a priority for me. So the priorities were never more than 2 or 3 things. And the things I were not going to do or was not going to do were never less than 5 to 10, right? So a very particular example there would be, I think the example I just gave, which is for XYZ reason, I'm not interested in product management as a career. And then the flip side of that, a priority of mine might have been exploring startups, to use 2 career things. So then anytime I were to look at the calendar and see for lunch that day that there was a really cool product manager from Google coming in to make a speech, it was really easy to be like, oh, I don't have to debate whether I'm going to that. So it just makes it really, really simple to schedule and manage your days.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, would you mind sharing another example from, because, you have such an interesting background getting that dual degree, which I imagine is even more things to pick from, like, I don't know if you have another example with maybe those 2 degrees or anything else. I think our listeners would love to hear it.
Yeah, no, it's actually a great point, because one of the things that made it a little tougher is we had more required classes that we were taking, right? Because I had a certain element of engineering classes I had to take. So I felt very precious with my electives and just time in general. I think another example that was very particular or small, or just very particular, was there was one quarter where one of the things I had on my to-don't list was any event with more than 8 people I was not going to go to for an entire quarter.
Wow.
And it was that quarter, I think it was like my second quarter, my second year. And at that point, I had some really, really close friends that I wanted to spend more time with and go deeper with before, we were never going to be in the same city again. And I had found myself the previous quarter going to all these happy hours and big nights downtown and things like that were fun, but that I was not loving. And so I just wrote down a very simple rule, which was if there were going to be more than 8 people there, I wasn't going to go. And it made it so easy to pick between the 5 to 10 social things that are going on every day while you're at school.
I absolutely love that. Love that. One more question for you about the book, because it sounds like it was part of the genesis of the book. And I'm also curious. Well, let me just read you the quote first. So you guys wrote, one of the best and most unique things we did during school was take an intentional and consistent approach to getting peer feedback. It was a catalyst for self-reflection, growth, and friendship. And I'd like you, if you can, to talk a little bit more about how you guys did this. I found it a bit astounding, frankly, that like in the MBA experience, it's kind of hard to get this sometimes. And I've heard this not just from your book, but from other people I've spoken with. And I think this is like such an important part of the experience. So I'd just like you to please share your thoughts on, how our listeners can do this once they're in their MBAs.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I don't think it's unique to the MBA experience. I think so much of or at least so much of my experience of the world is like designed to not give you certain types of feedback, right? Because most people are conflict avoidant. And particularly if you're in a job that is rotational in any way, it's often easier to not give someone feedback because you won't work with them again than it is to give them feedback. And I think that Bob and I both come from like a sports background where, to say the least, you're constantly getting feedback either by winning or losing very explicitly or getting yelled at by a coach or a teammate or something like that. So we always found that weird to not necessarily get the same in the professional world, or when you did get it, to only get it once per quarter or something like that. And I think the MBA environment is no different. I think the thing that him and I kind of committed to from a discipline perspective very early on was just being willing to have those semi-awkward conversations. And they're not really awkward after you do them a few times, but just being willing to do a small group project with someone and then text them like to start very specific things like, hey, I've been working on my public speaking. Is there any way you could kind of give me feedback anytime during this class I'm called on, because I'm trying to say less or like yes. Who's not down to help you with that, right? And that's kind of like the first step to doing that more systematically. So we get into this a lot more in the book in terms of the different levels or ways that you can do this. But I think in the end, it comes down to just 2 things. One is a willingness and a discipline to push past the initial discomfort and ask for it and get over yourself if you have anything that feels like it's stopping you from doing it. And then the second is knowing what you're trying to improve or work on so that you can ask for helpful feedback, right? Like you're never going to get good feedback if you go, that's not true. You will sometimes, particularly if you're a huge jerk, but you're less likely to get valuable feedback if you just go up to people and say, hey, can you give me feedback, right? But if you go up to someone and to use the exact same example, say, I'm looking to say less,
right?
Very easy for people to give you feedback. But you have to know what you want to improve, or you have to know what you're not great at.
That's great advice. Adam, I just said, so please give me feedback on that.
I'm saying it all the time.
Yeah.
I noticed it. It seems like an example.
Trust me, as someone who has recorded, over 190 podcasts, it's tough to listen to yourself sometimes.
Oh, have you gotten over it? Like, I cannot listen to myself. Have you, are you past that?
Not really. It's still a little bit painful sometimes, but like you said, I mean, the best part about recording something in the same way and similar to sports is you get immediate feedback. So at least you can hopefully get better.
I'm curious, what's the biggest thing you've changed speaking wise or even just host wise since starting this?
I think trying to be more succinct with my questions, trying to talk less, trying to listen more, and just trying to go where the conversation leads, as opposed to, of course, I have questions in mind, but, really trying to hone in on things that my guest says that they're clearly very passionate about or that they want to talk more about, and just having a more natural conversation. Very basic things, but they do take practice.
That makes a ton of sense. And if you don't mind, I have one more for you, which is, what's the most non-obvious way someone is a bad interviewee, right? Like, I'm sure, if people talk too little or talk too much, that sucks. But what's the most non-obvious way that you feel like someone did or it was annoying to have them on?
I think when they sound super canned, it's the worst. Like when someone's reading, when their answer sounds like they're reading from a document, it's the worst. I mean, maybe that works in like a webinar or a more formal presentation, but in the podcast medium, I think it just kills the vibe and you can't really connect. Like we're having this conversation and I kind of sense the ebbs and flows of it. And when someone's just reading from like their Word document, I can't reach you at all. Like we're not connecting. So yeah, that's probably one of my pet peeves.
That makes a ton of sense. I feel like I have the opposite, which is we wrote this book, I think 2 years ago, maybe longer at this point. And I've forgotten some of the structure of it, like I forgot what that second question was. And I remember it now, but I'm like, oh, I could have, I remember, I'm even thinking back now, like the whole thing around, asking what people don't like there was a whole different way we framed that. And I just forgot, but that's all right.
Well, yeah, but you haven't forgotten the principles clearly. And I just want to thank you again for coming on the show, and thank you and Bob for writing this book.
Of course. This was fun.
And I hope, those of you who have just gotten into your dream programs or are inching closer to that, please do pick up a coffee. It's called MBA Coffee Chats. Thoughtful advice on how to get the most out of your MBA. I'll link to it in the show notes. Adam Putterman, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your insights.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for asking great questions and answering a few of mine. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Remember, you can get free school selection help and a profile review at touchmba.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just search for Touch MBA.